Joseph likewise draws near to adore. The earthly shadow of the eternal Father rests softly on the child. His temporal birth is complete in its adumbration of his unbeginning and unending nativity. Joseph draws near, that most hidden of all God's saints, shrouded in the very clouds and shadows which surround the unbegotten fountain of the Godhead. His soul is an abyss of nameless graces, of graces deeper than those from which ordinary virtues spring, roots which make no trial of the winter of this world, but wait to bear marvelous blossoms before the face of God in the world to come. We can give no name to the character of his sanctity. We cannot compare him with any other of the saints of God. As his office was unshared, so was his grace. It followed the peculiarities of his office. It stood alone. He was to Mary among men what Gabriel was to her among angels, but he came nearer to her than Gabriel, for he was of her nature. What St. John was to Mary after Calvary, Joseph was to her after Bethlehem, so that probably, if we could perceive it, there was an analogy between his holiness and that of the beloved disciple. But his sanctification is hidden in obscurity. It is probable that he had received the gift of original justice, as the Baptist had, though whether it was restored to him before birth, as with John and Jeremias, we cannot tell. It is becoming to think also that by a special grace he was preserved from venial sin. It is most certain that he was a peculiar vessel of the divine predilection, eternally predestined to a singular and incomparably sublime office, and laden with the most magnificent of graces to fit him for that office. For wonderful as was his office to Mary, his office to Jesus far surpassed it, unless, as is more true, the former was but a portion of the latter. He stood to Jesus visibly in the place of the eternal Father. He was loved therefore in a most peculiar way by the divine person whom he thus awfully represented, and also in a most peculiar way by the second and third persons of the most holy Trinity. Because of that mysterious representation, the human soul of Jesus must have regarded him, not only with the tenderest love, but also with deep reverence and an inexplicable submission. Meek and gentle, blameless and loving, as Saint Joseph was, it is not possible to think of him without extreme awe, because of that shadow of identity with the eternal Father which belongs to him, and hides him from our sight even while it presents him to our faith. We cannot describe his holiness, because we have no term of comparison. It was not only higher in degree than that of the saints, it was also different in kind, but it was eminently hidden with God. His life was an unearthly life. His very place in the world was but a seeming place. He was an apparition in the world, an apparition of the unbegotten and everlasting. His soul was as it were withdrawn into itself. He was weak and in years, mild and unresenting, poor and obscure, passive and docile, and yet an inexpugnable fortress behind which the honor of Mary and the life of Jesus was secure. If his hiddenness was like that of God, so also was his tranquility. His justice, like that of God, was so tempered with mercy, that it almost lost its look of justice, and wore the semblance of indulgence. His holiness was one of God's eternal ideas, one of those which he most cherished, and kept nearest to himself. He communicated with God in his hours of sleep, as if his sleep was but the mystic slumber of contemplation. Even now in the Church he stands back under the shadow of the Old Testament, as if that were rather the dispensation of the Father, and therefore the most congenial place for him. He draws near to the newborn Jesus, that he may adore before he commands. His vast soul fills silently with love, and his life would have broken and ebbed away at the infant's feet upon the floor of the cave, as it did years afterwards on his lap, but the time was not come, and the babe sanctified him anew, and fortified him with amazing quiet strength and robust gentleness, and raised him into a higher sphere of holiness and of grace unspeakable, in order that he might be the official superior of his God.